Welcome to the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I'm your host, Tina Love, and on this episode, we have Dr. Charlayne Grenci. Dr. Grenci is a clinical sexologist, a clinical professor, sexuality coach, a relationship expert, and an authority on BDSM. She is a graduate of Maimonides University, an affiliate of the American Academy of Clinical Sexologists, and a diplomat of the American Board of Clinical Sexology. She is also known as Grand Mistress Carla, who has worked as a professional dominatrix with an ongoing unconventional sexuality research program since 1980. Welcome, Dr. Grenci, to the show.
Well, thank you very much, Tina. I appreciate you having me on.
You are a pretty interesting woman, I'll tell you.
Thanks.
Wow. You know, that's not even half of it, listeners, what I said about her. Like, she has a lot more going on, which we're going to find out. You're an author of 3 books, in which we're going to talk about those books and everything. So, yeah, I'm just really glad to have you as a guest on the show. It's going to be really, really interesting. All right.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I want to focus our time together talking about you and what led you into the world of BDSM and America's notorious dominatrix, the queen of domination, Mistress Carla. So that's what I want to know. So how did you get into all this?
In around December of 1979, a friend of mine who ran an escort agency had a dominatrix, and the dominatrix became sick right after she had an ad that was doing an awful lot of business. I was only a friend, and I was over visiting one day when her phone was ringing off the wall. And I asked her what was going on, and she told me. And then when she got off the phone, she came over and sat down. She said, Charlayne, I think you would make a great dominatrix. I said, what in the hell is that? And when she told me, I was like, oh my gosh, because I come from a very, my background in childhood, very religious, overly protected and private school girl. And I had no clue what she was talking about. And she said, you don't have sex. You know, she got her riding crop and rope and a witch's cape, Halloween cape out of the closet. And she said, here, this is the beginning right here. Just go and talk down to some guy that wants humiliation or hit him with a crop or whatever. I thought the whole thing was insane, to be honest. I thought it was crazy. I had never heard of anything like that, nor read anything about that in my entire life.
Right.
But I wanted to help her out. So I thought, well, she says I have a dominant, colorful personality anyway. I'll try it. And I tried it. And it was it seemed to be in the beginning an easy way to make money, which I wasn't making very well at the time. This is pre-school, pre-college, the rest of my college years. So within a couple of weeks, I felt I had enough knowledge to open a playroom, so to speak, in my own home in Pompano Beach, Florida, which I did in January of 1980.
All right. So I wanna just back up just in case there's a listener out there like you that back in the day you said you didn't even know what that was. You're like, well, what is a dominant? Can you just explain to people what BDSM is and what's a dominatrix? Because somebody may not know.
Exactly. Well, a lot of the terminology has changed since the 80s. They called it just B&D, then they called it just S&M, sadomasochism. Now it's BDSM, which is a combination of bondage, discipline, and sadomasochism. And it's fantasy oriented. It's role playing. And what the dominatrix does is initiate and oversee the role play as the dominant figure. And the people that come to her are either submissive or brand new at this, vanilla, we call that. They will come and say, have an interview if it's done properly and tell what their fantasies are, fetishes if they have any, experience, whatever. And then the dominatrix makes a session out of that information.
And those,
And
yeah, I was gonna say those sessions could be what, an hour, 2 hours? What's a session like?
Um, yes, yes. The common one is 1 hour, although there are extended sessions. Yes.
Okay. All right. And you became pretty famous in doing this. You had hundreds of clients to walk through your dungeon's door. This was in, you
Yes.
said, Pompano Beach, South Florida. So can you
How did
tell?
that happen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you tell a little bit
I can
about?
see how that happened. Well, in Pompano Beach back in starting from 1980 on, everything in the BDSM world was extremely underground.
Hmm.
There wasn't anybody operating except myself. All right. So therefore, when people, businessmen or tourists or whatever, came to South Florida to vacation or on business, and they looked in the magazines, that's where they found me. And because I was quote unquote the only show in town in those first few years, I got international um, uh, exposure
Hmm.
with ads and people seeing this and that, and then they would put it in an ad in Europe or wherever and around the country. So I came up with the idea of Queen of Domination to follow that through with my advertising. Kelly, my friend, had said Mistress Carla would be a good name to start with, and it just progressed from there. I had about a 500 client list until February 4th of 1983.
Yeah, yeah. So now
Mm-hmm.
there are still dungeons out there, or these places that
Mm-hmm.
this is being done. Tell us about your dungeon. So if we would have walked into your dungeon, what would we see? What Take me there. What would I see?
Yeah. Well, in 1980, if you came through you'd come through my front door in my modest home in Pompano Beach. I had turned my single car garage into the dungeon playroom. It had a rack on the wall. It had a bolt hoist system, so you could attach somebody's cuffs to a crank that would pull them straight up over their head. There was a rack, a floor rack I had custom made, and different equipment, like cuffs and crops and floggers, blindfolds, different things that I had to use as the accessories. So when you came in there, you saw what the one of the first playrooms looked like. I had people coming, like I said, from all over the country as well, and they would say, "You have one of the best in the country." Well, that made me feel good because I had nothing to compare mine with at the time,
Yeah.
and no other dominatrix to talk to, no mentors, nothing. It was all, learn as I go.
Wow. Wow. So you just kind of taught yourself and just kind of happened into this. Like it ended up being a real success. So men would come, women would come, couples. Is that true? I mean, so how was your
No,
clientele? Or it's just men? Was it just men or?
in the early '80s, it was only men.
Okay.
I believe it was. I believe it was too underground to for the others to surface yet. The women and the couples and everything. So it was all men. Many very wealthy men because it was considered expensive in the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something that they had like a sport or hobby they had on addition to maybe playing golf or whatever, something, a different outlet, a different type of entertainment for themselves.
Okay. And you learned a whole lot during this time with all of the clients that you had. You were able to, learn a lot. And I think you kind of turned some of this into some of your research too, in
Yes,
answering,
it did.
yeah, answering questions. So what were some of the things that you learned? I mean, what led most of the men to want to be dominated? What did you find was the thing that made them want this?
Okay. To answer the first part of your question was I started um, with my assistant doing an interview with them prior to them seeing me in session.
Okay.
And then after session, I would have them sit on the floor at my feet or on the chair, whatever made them more comfortable, because of course the headset is done now. The role play was over, but some of them, they continued as long as they were in my presence. And I would interview them and I would ask them all kinds of questions about their childhood, about their relationships, etc., which separated me from all other dominatrixes. And until later on in life, like even into the 90s when I went back to college, I didn't even realize I was doing something that was similar, not of course as half as extensive or as important as the Kinsey Institute was doing in the early 40s, 50s, or whatever 60s. I was interviewing people. I wanted to know
Mm-hmm.
why they were there. I was that curious. So I learned a lot from that. And the interviews, people that wanted to be interviewed after a session, a lot of them were professors here in South Florida, believe it or not,
Mm.
because they were as curious about me and about what they were doing as I was about them and why they were doing it. And from what I found back then in those days, that kept me more interested in keeping this ongoing profession slash study research, which again, like I said, separates just the ones that we called uh, hookers with whips. That was the term back in those days, with
Mm-hmm.
when dominatrixes were just, you know, operating as S&Mers or whatever. Would share things about their childhood, what first turned them on when they were 5, 6 years old, whether it had to do with a mother, an aunt, a next door neighbor, whether it had to do with toilet training or being punished. And I started putting all this together in my head. It didn't quite make much sense at the time, but when you hear it over and over um, for almost 3 years, more than 3 years actually, uh, the stories, then you start saying, wait. There is a reason for a dominatrix. There is a reason for these men to need an important outlet, an escape, if you will, a mental escape, an outlet, which to me is very not only emotionally beneficial, but psychologically, it's when you can relax the mind and then not be in a control position like a lot of them are in their everyday lives and their professions, and just become submissive mentally to another character slash role player dominatrix. That gives the brain, the mind, a bit of a vacation, and
Ah,
a lot of these men needed that. They still do, to relax and enjoy themselves in another world. Because
wow.
when you walk into a dungeon with a dominatrix, you can forget the world outside because it's so different. The atmosphere is different. Who they're dealing with is totally different than their wife or their girlfriend. So um, a lot of them found that to be extremely beneficial to them, and they got into it. It was a turn on. A lot of them said it turned them on. They went home and had great sex with their wives or girlfriends. Well, good. That's fine because that's that's what erotic movies are supposed to do too, right?
Uh-huh.
So or porn or whatever. But that's why I became extremely interested in all of that.
Yeah. So it's almost as though maybe they were in, you said there were some professors, maybe people, men who were in positions of power,
I've had
maybe, yeah, always needing to be in control and knowing, making decisions and knowing everything that was going to happen, or, head of companies and everything. And then by being with you and turning over in this dungeon, they could do something totally opposite. They could just
exactly.
let go of all the control, let go of all of the, being the person with all the answers and knowing everything. And they could turn over their power to somebody else like you. And then they wanted you then to order them around or tell
Absolutely.
them what
Yes.
to do or punish them or whatever. Wow.
Yes. And a lot of my clientele were CEOs, doctors, lawyers, professors in the universities, and I had them fly in from the islands, the big CEOs and everything. So yes, it proved to be that it was in those days. It was more the high pressure job gentlemen that were seeking out this type of service. That's not exactly the same today, although they still do, but it's a lot different today.
Yeah. And leading, they led. You've mentioned in your books that they led double lives.
Mm-hmm.
So can you kind of share a little bit more? Are you saying that
Oh, yeah.
they could have been married, but then what double lives? Can you get more into
Okay.
that? Yeah.
This is coming from Dr. Grenci as well. Most men lead a double life.
Okay.
Whether they're into domination or not, whether
Mm-hmm.
whether they're into BDSM or not. Okay, we learn this in clinical sexology.
Oh, yeah. Break it down. Let's hear it.
Yeah, most men have the need for that. They're not really programmed physiologically to be monogamous. They're born to basically spread their seed. Whatever the uh, reasoning is, you can go a lot of different directions with that. But men, that's why most of them cheat on their wives, or they have a mistress on the side, or they go to a dominatrix or whatever, because they can't, it's very hard for them most of them, there's always a lot of exceptions to the rule,
Mm-hmm.
to be in one relationship with one woman.
Hmm. Interesting. And
Hmm.
so it's hard for them to do this. And so that's why they seek out to have this other side, where they have this other life or be able to be something totally different in another way.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
Yes.
Okay. Now, you
Hmm.
mentioned also about domination and submission being based on their kinky fantasies and fetishes.
Yes.
So, can you really break that down for some of the listeners? Because somebody may not really understand maybe what a fetish is or uh, some of the fantasies that you learned that these men enjoyed. So, can you sort of
Yes.
expound?
There are about 500, uh, known, written about paraphilias, but fetish is a paraphilia. Okay.
Okay.
And a fetish is usually an inanimate object or a part of the body that a person needs in their sexuality, in their sexual activity, to become turned on, to get off. So if somebody is into just feet or foot worship, or they're into just S&M, meaning a certain type of discipline with a paddle or a whip or spanking, there are different types of fetishes of that nature, and that's where we get the fantasy role play.
I see. Now,
Mm-hmm.
when you talk about the different, paddles or whips and different things, can you
Mm-hmm.
give some examples of some of the tools that you used as ways of punishment? What were some of the tools that you?
Canes, whether bamboo or otherwise, real thin, slim, even uh, slim branches off of trees, switches they call them,
Mm-hmm.
different types of riding crops. You've got floggers, which are the ones with the either thin or thick. Um, Gosh, I just got a brain glitch. They're the whips are the one piece, the one tail.
Mm-hmm.
The floggers are the ones that have multi tails. So whether they're in leather or suede or whatever, and depending upon the person's, some individuals have a need or a fantasy or a desire just for a certain type of implement used on them.
Oh,
They may
okay.
be very particular. It may only be leather. Just use leather. Just a leather paddle. That's all I want. Or just a crop. Or just hand spanking or whatever. So some don't care and they're not as picky, but others will just specify they're only into wooden paddles, or they're only into medium effects floggers. So it really depends on the individual. There are millions of different. I mean, everybody was so different and so multifaceted. It was amazing.
Wow. Okay. And
Hmm.
did this require them to be constrained? So like restraints. So did they have to have their hands tied or did they always have to have their handcuffs on or, different things? Can you explain?
Bond, yes, bondage is actually the most popular of all of it. Bondage done in a number of ways, whether it's used handcuffs, regular leather cuffs, rope bondage, either put on a rack or on a table or on a floor in different positions. But bondage is, believe it or not, that is one of the words that is so detested by the police department.
Okay.
believe it or not. Bondage is one of the words they do not like at all. And it's the most popular. When you get people in your dungeon, they usually want some sort of bondage with their fetish or their fantasy or their paraphilia, whatever. So, that's why interviews are extremely important, because a dominatrix cannot say, well, I'm having a session with John, and not interview him. You could give him a totally different session than what he can handle, what he likes, or whatever. So that's why these in-depth interviews and negotiations are very important.
Right.
And then you have to give a safe word with that.
And you had to probably really ask them questions about the amount of force, or the force of the force, I guess is what I'm saying.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, because I've heard of, having signs, or of, red, green, yellow, this is, red meaning stop, or whatever. So you had to probably learn what the amount of pressure that they wanted. And so
Yes.
in your interviews, how did you really gauge? Or was it that you had to hit them and then they would tell you harder or whatever? Like, how does that work? How do you determine the level of force?
That's another excellent question, Tina, because when you get somebody new that you've never had in a session before, and they put in their pre-interview that they want medium S&M or medium force, medium pain, however you want to, define that. And then you get them in session and you see that medium pain or force is either too much for them or not enough for them.
Right.
Most of them, unless they're experienced and have been through this for, quite some time, don't even know themselves until they get into it. So I had to experiment. And I usually had a little test that I experimented, and I would tell them, this is light, and see how they reacted. This is medium. That's enough. Okay, fine. Then there's your safe word right there. Right. You call strawberries if it gets to that point.
Wow. Now, did you ever find, Dr. Grenci, that, you're a lady? I mean, I would think, and they're men, and they could be of all shapes and sizes. And, did you find maybe that there were some men that wanted it harder than you were able to give? And how did that work? Had you ever?
Yes, back in like 1981, there was the one gentleman that came to me that was his interview said he was into heavy S&M. I was so naive to it, and he set up a 3-hour session, which I'm telling anybody that's listening, unless you're 20 years old and you're a superwoman, I would not do anything more than an hour or two in heavy S&M, because it's too exhausting.
I'm telling you.
It's like just getting on a treadmill and running for 3 hours. You can't do it physically. It's not healthy for the dominatrix. But I did it because I hadn't done it before, had never been requested before, and it was horribly exhausting. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. And yeah, it was. But this person, little did I know that he was doing cocaine, which, I was anti-drug, so I didn't even suspect it. And that gives them a very, a much higher pain threshold.
Tolerance, yeah, exactly.
I didn't know, because, I had a lot to learn in those 80s, 1980s.
My God. I mean, I can imagine you're swatting. I mean, this is like tearing you apart. You're like wanting to fall out after this. Yes.
That should have been on film. I'm telling you, yes.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Mm-hmm. So now, of course, because they come by themselves, and you mentioned earlier how, after these sessions, it's like a pre-turn on, I guess, then they go back to their wives or whatever, and then they're hot and ready or whatever. I don't know. But they don't want their partner to know, though, that they do this. They don't want their partner to do this to them. Why did you, or were you able to find out why they don't want their sexual partner involved in something like this? Yeah, please tell me.
Yes. Well, even this stands true today. I would say a very small percentage will disclose that type of information to their spouse or their girlfriend or even boyfriend, because for the simple main reason is they are afraid of their partner thinking they're sick or there's something severely wrong with them. They do not want to gross out their partner with their fetishes and fantasies, and they're afraid of doing such by ruining the relationship, ruining the marriage. That and then the rumor of that getting into their family or their children, they just feel safer to keep that type of information about themselves to themselves.
I see. And do you
Most
find,
of them.
yeah, so it's definitely a secret, and it's something that's people, you don't want anybody knowing. And do you
Mhm.
find that even today, and even back when you had the dungeon, uh that it was a secretly disclosed place? Was your place a secretly disclosed place? Like, no, people didn't know unless they were getting this done or having a session, they wouldn't have known that your place was a dungeon.
In
Uh,
the early 80s, like from like 80 to 83, it was in my home in Pompano, and I believe a couple of the neighbors got interested in what was going on because of the cars coming and going throughout the week.
uh,
But the address of where I lived, because it was my home as well, was never advertised. Whereas when I opened up my dungeon club in Pompano Beach, Florida, that was open to the public, that address was given out. And for the 16 years I owned and operated it, everybody knew where I was located on Rock Island Road at first in North Lauderdale, but the rest of the years, the other 13 years, on East Temple Road in Pompano Beach, everybody, including the cops and code enforcement, everybody knew where I was. It
wow.
wasn't easy. It was not easy.
Wasn't easy. Yeah.
No.
So, when did you start doing work with women, or did you ever start to do work with women and couples? And if so, tell me about that. How did you start working with women and couples?
Yes, in the Rock Island Road location, the first location for Command Performance, 1992, um, men were bringing in their girlfriends out of curiosity or their wives, and I saw, wow, this is a totally different ball game than the early '80s.
Mm-hmm.
They're starting to try to become interested in this scene with their partner. Um, I was only asked maybe a half a dozen times in those 16 years to do a session on a woman, but it was for, her curiosity, and he wanted to watch. The partner wanted to watch. And I would do that. It felt different and odd at first, but then, of course, it becomes secondhand like everything else. That started in the early 90s. Mhm.
Okay. And so, did women desire kinky sex too? And can you give some examples of what women wanted in their experiences with you?
Yeah, women, as a rule, a lot of women like rough sex anyway. Some of them probably are more hesitant there again to tell their partner, whereas the bold ones will, and they usually get what they want, because men are usually very accommodating. But when you have a couple where one is worried about hurting the other one, which I've heard a lot of times, oh, I don't want to hurt her. Oh, I don't want to hurt him. He's my husband. Well, you know, if that's what they want to keep their sexuality and their relationship going, you kind of have to, bend in the middle,
Uh huh.
or that person is going to seek eventually, possibly, not all the time, seek the activity elsewhere.
Wow. That's got to be pretty interesting, especially if you're not really a person to use force on anybody, or maybe the woman
Mhm.
has had force on her before. Maybe she's been, you know, somebody's beat her up before, and so
Mhm.
it's pretty hard for her to do that kind of thing. I bet that's a
Mhm.
challenge for some women to be able to participate and do. That may be difficult.
Yes, it is. And there are a lot of situations where, especially in this new millennium that I've seen, even in the 90s, but where, women have gone into relationships with a man and tried their hardest to get into it. And some of them do on a certain level, and some of them don't. It's the same as in the swingers lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
They'll talk their wife or girlfriend into going into a swingers club, and some of them will get into it with them, and some will not. some feel, the wives, as I've seen this too, had a lot of experience with that. Other wives are just doing it out of protest just to make their husband happy. So, sex is such a unique subject.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
what is your thought about that? If somebody's doing something just to make somebody else happy, but they don't really enjoy it, they don't like doing it, is that something that you would recommend as a sexologist for them to do?
It's not something I would recommend because as far as that goes, the person that's doing what they don't want to do is just going to build resentment underneath. And if it goes on too long, it could turn her totally off, or cause a divorce or whatever.
Yeah.
So no, no. I can't really tell a person or a couple, don't do this or don't do that. We have to give them the options and the choices, and they have to make it themselves. But I would say, if somebody said that question to me that you just did, that's exactly what I would say.
Yeah.
I would tell them that.
Okay.
And I had couples come into my office when I had an office for so many years. I still do sessions, but when I had an office in Pompano, separate from the dungeon business, I would have couples come into me because most of them, the husband was into S&M with the wife, and the wife was just doing it to appease. The things I would hear, because I would talk to him and then her separately, then them together. And when I would speak the truth and tell the two of them when they came back in what I thought about this going on,
Right.
inevitably the man would not bring the wife back.
Oh.
They do not want their wives to hear the truth a lot of times. But I'm not the type of person just to lead somebody on to get their money.
Right.
I'm very truthful, very transparent. And whether I have a flourishing business or not, I'm going to tell the truth.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Now this is going to be interesting. This question I'm going to ask you. Did you ever find, if a man brought his wife or girlfriend there to participate with you, did they ever ask you to join them in any kind of kinky sex or any kind of act? And did you find sometimes the man getting jealous of
Oh,
the
goodness.
response that the female would give to you?
Absolutely.
Tell me about that.
Yes, Tina, you asked some excellent questions. You really do. Like I said, there were several couples that came in, and they wanted me to dominate the woman. I think there was once that I dominated both.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw that the woman was responding to me quite well. Maybe she was a bit bisexual, whatever. I mean, women's sexuality is extremely fluid. So if they're enjoying something with, their same sex uh, person, it happens. Okay.
Okay.
And I have seen jealousy, but I saw a lot more jealousy when I used to frequent a swingers club. I would do my S&M shows at a swingers club. I was the only one permitted in the back room fully dressed. I would not go in the back room to put on a towel or be nude. I told the owner, if I can go in the back, because I do research on this,
Mm-hmm.
I would like to go in, but I have to be fully dressed. And he allowed that. Well, a couple of times, Tina, it happened several times actually, when I was sitting out holding court out in the main room in the bar area, and they were always asking me questions because I was Mistress Carla. It was all sexual questions that they were asking. Every once in a while, a man would come over to me and say, would you take my wife in the back and show her what it's like to be with a woman? Well, this is in the 80s now, okay? I was a lot younger then, and like I said, I was experimenting with all facets, or not all, but most facets of sexuality. So I took a couple of them on in that, to see what would happen. But I kind of knew, even having never done it, every time the husband could not handle seeing the woman react to me.
Mm.
And he forbid her to even talk to me if he saw me in the club after that.
Right. It
Oh
just,
yes,
yeah, it
it was
just made me,
amazing.
yeah,
Yeah.
it just made me think about that when you said,
Mhm.
they wouldn't bring her back, or, I just wondered if maybe,
Yeah.
you had participated and, what this response would be from the male and whether or not, it would be like, well, no, I don't want her with you anymore because of her response to you. Yeah, that's so. Just kind of
Exactly.
wondering. Yeah, yeah.
That's
Now,
exactly what happened.
eventually, you had some problems legally with your
Yeah.
dungeon, and
Mhm.
there was this big bust up. So, can you tell what happened?
Absolutely. On February 4th of 1983, when I was still doing sessions in my makeshift dungeon in my garage in my home, at 5 p.m., the coordinated Broward Sheriff's Department and Pompano Beach Police raided my home when I was home alone. Actually, I had cramps. I was in bed. I wasn't feeling well. And they took, like you see on TV, that big black thing that they bang the door in. And they banged the door in. The little thing on the knob came right up and zoop, whizzed past my eye. Could have put my eye out.
Mm.
I just stood there and I was paralyzed. I couldn't move. I just stood in the living room, and my feet were like glued to the floor. And here come all these cops with and the reporters with the big cameras on their shoulders past me, just going throughout my house. It was traumatic. It was horrible,
Wow,
and
wow.
it was a 3 hour experience. They left me without a door and never arrested me because they wanted that 30 days after that in which to gain more evidence and take all the stuff that they had confiscated out of my home because they stripped my house of everything. They tore it apart. Also looking for drugs. But
That's
I'm
what I
so
was
anti
wondering. Yeah.
drugs. Thank God they didn't find drugs.
I was just wondering. I said, did they? I was just thinking they must have thought they were going to find drugs or something.
Absolutely. Yes, they do, because with an activity that they think is so bizarre and kinky anyway, they figure that drugs are,
Has to be involved. Yeah.
added. I really believe, had they not really known there were drugs there, they really thought there were. I think they would have come and planted them. I really
Wow.
believe that in those
Wow.
days, maybe even today, they would have planted them, but they were so sure they were going to find drugs, they tore my freezer apart, all my drawers, clothing drawers, closets, everything looking for. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Mhm.
And so what happened as a result? You had to end up closing, or you had a court battle, or how did this
Oh,
all
yes.
end? Yeah.
The court battle started then with my attorney. I got a First Amendment attorney, and it went on until my trial, which was in 1984. My sentencing was 1985, and then I did 3 months in jail. Then I was on probation, got off in half time. So that whole ordeal I went through was from 83 to 88.
Wow. Okay. Man.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all of this in books that you've written. So I
Yeah.
want to talk about those three books. Can you share the three books? Because I've started reading two of them. But if you'll
Okay.
share with the audience the three books.
Yes, I will. The original copy is Queen of Domination: My Secret Life. What you find in there is the book that another fellow and myself started back in '82, and that's the book that they were going to send me to prison on if I sold books. Okay, the
Right.
judge said if he caught me hawking books, he would send me to prison. So I put that manuscript up on a shelf for over 30 years. And when 50 Shades of Grey came out, I thought, maybe I should bring this book out.
Yeah.
I brought it out, changed the title to Queen of Domination, and published it in August 2014. It was then I met an agent who told me I should divide the book in half and elaborate, just sink into my memory field, go back to all my transcripts and everything I have because I'm a very big note taker, and I made the book, so big they had to divide it in half. So now it's America's Notorious Dominatrix,
Mm-hmm.
and the sequel, which is the other half, which means from trial to Dr. Grenci days, is the I don't even have it in front of me. Yes, I do. It's right here. Hang on just a minute.
The Dark Society. Is that the Dark Society?
Dark, Dark Sides of Society.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
The subtitle is Forbidden World of Hedonism.
Right.
That's the second book, the second part of America's Notorious Dominatrix, which is Sex, Crime, and Punishment.
Yeah. All right. Well, very, very interesting. I'll tell you, listening audience, I've already started reading a couple of them, and gosh, you have seen so much.
Yeah.
I cannot even tell you, people listening right now, this lady has written so much and very interesting, and it'll just have you not wanting to put it down. I'll tell you. I've been reading and reading and reading. So very, very good. So how can people hear more from you? They can get your books. Are you on
Yeah.
social media? Do you have a website? What can you tell
Yeah.
us? Yeah.
I'm on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, Google, and I post a lot on Facebook as well. But my books are all on Amazon under Dr. Charlayne Grenci. I've written six or seven, I forget now.
Yeah.
So they all, or they can email me at Dr. Grenci, Grenci at bellsouth.net, or call me at 954-980-2780. All that information is at the bottom of my posts on Facebook, and I'm listed under just Charlayne Grenci on Facebook. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, wants a counseling session, educational session, learn how to be a dominatrix or learn how to be a couple, enjoying the scene together with your partner, I do all of that. And I can do it by Skype. I can do it in my limousine or at their house, uh, or, just by phone. It's up to whatever more comfortable for the individual or the couple.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Grinchi. Very, very interesting. You're an interesting lady, I'll tell you. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Thank you for coming on the show. And
Well, it's
listeners,
a pleasure.
yeah, listeners, thank you all so much for listening to the Lovers Lounge podcast, where we talk to experts and other guests on topics related to love, relationships, and sex. I am your host, Tina Love. And until next time, peace. And don't forget, love.